the NFC South, which is the most uncertain of all. We got the team that might win that division here, which is the Falcons. Their big move last year, they were 7-10, but they were a good 7-10. They're a 7-10 that you're like, oh, I'm surprised they won as many games as they did. Arthur Smith enabling that run scheme with Tyler Algier and Cordell Patterson, the ageless wonder that is Cordell Patterson.
Yeah.
And then they go out and they draft the best running back in the draft in Bijan Robinson. He looks like he's going to make some noise for him. You look at their offense real quick, you're like, wait a minute. Drake London, Kyle Pitts, if Kyle Pitts can live up to his name, pretty good. Their offensive line, really good. And then their defense, they got some nice players on defense as well. They went out and signed Jesse Bates. So that should be a good team as well. So for the Falcons, I'm excited for where they are. And I think they should potentially win the division.
Yeah, they're loaded with first-round talent all over the field on the offensive side of the football. And I think what Arthur Smith did is people are like, take a defensive player, take an offensive lineman who's like, you know what this team needs? We're in Atlanta, baby. We need some swag on this team. We need some juice. We need some mojo to hype up a young quarterback, or maybe when we go out there and get our future quarterback next year, let me bring in Taylor Heineke, who can be a stable guy, and he's probably going to start out the season with Heineke, and Heineke has shown he can be good. And I think Washington, Riverboat Ron,
yeah.
And I think Taylor Heineke with the offensive head coach with top round talent across the field at wide receiver, at running back, at tight end, if Kyle Pitts can live up to his name, as you mentioned, I think this team can be a really competitive team. I don't think they'll win the division. Because we'll get to the Saints later, but I think this is a team trending upward that's going to surprise a lot of people and could potentially, you won 7 games last year, you're better this year, you could definitely go out there and win probably 8 to 10 games, because guess what? We mentioned with the Jaguars why they can win the 1 seed. It's because they're playing the NFC South. Well, on the flip side, the NFC South is also playing the AFC South, which is also the worst division in that conference. So you have the two worst divisions going head to head. Going to see a lot of surprise teams in that division. It's going to be an alley-oop for the Falcons.
Absolutely. And then we talk about the Saints real quick. The Saints last year, a lot of quarterback questions. They had Trevor Siemian. They had Jameis. They had Andy Dalton at one point, the Red Rocket himself. And also a lot of injuries as well. They were kind of banged up, but they were still in contention towards the end. Didn't quite squeak in there, but now they get Derek Carr, who's their best quarterback since Drew Brees. Jameis Winston backing him up. Taysom Hill, the wonder himself, still in that mix. They also have Chris Olave in there. Alvin Kamara will be back in week 4. They went out and signed Jamal Williams to back him up. And then on the defensive side, the Saints, kind of like the Steelers, historically always a great defense. And I think that's going to be the same this year. So the Saints team, I think, is the safest bet. You also have Michael Thomas. He's a big question mark for them. Can he at least be 80% of the 2019 Michael Thomas that was setting records and being the slant king himself? I think they can be. I think they should be a playoff team 100%, or at least a wild card team at the worst. Yeah. They'll be really good. And outside of that, we'll see what we can get with Dennis Allen in year 2 to this point, but I'm excited. I think the Saints will be good.
Yeah, I think the Saints will be good. And the number one reason for that is the addition of Derek Carr. You were able to stay competitive with Andy Dalton, all the quarterbacks you mentioned before. Don't need to go back deep into that. But the thing with Derek Carr is he felt mistreated in Oakland. Last year was a complete disaster. And then he wants to really prove himself as a good quarterback in the NFL. I really think his personality meshes well with the city of New Orleans. And I think where the quarterback is and their personality, like Mahomes, perfect fit in Kansas City. Burrow, perfect fit in Ohio. Josh Allen with the Bills. We get it. And then also with Derek Carr, it's not that he has a chip on his shoulder. It's like he has one of those chips where you know those like Lay's stacks containers. You like grab a stack and then you just get that nice crack when you bite into it. He pulled out a stack of those, put them on his shoulder, and he's like, I'm ready to go this year, baby. I am ready to have one of the best defenses I've ever had, the most stable organization I've ever been a part of. And then I'm going to have Alvin Kamara after he comes back from his suspension this year. I think he'll take a step forward after, his escapades in the offseason, going around like 21 Savage and beating people up in clubs and elevators. So I think with Alvin Kamara back, I'm not going to bank on Michael Thomas, but I do know Chris Olave was very dynamic with poor quarterback play last year.
Yeah.
And if that's any indication, Derek Carr is proven that he can make good fantasy wide receivers, and he's not a quarterback you look at and like, I don't know if I want to draft that receiver because he's playing with Derek Carr. Had Hunter Renfrow, Devontae Adams was still a good fantasy player last year.
Yep.
So I think with all that, Cam Jordan's still on the defense.
Yeah.
And that's really what it's going to come down to. So I do believe the Saints are going to win the division. And if they get into a 4-5 game where they have home field advantage versus a team like the Cowboys, probably pick them to win.
Yeah, I like that. And then the other two teams, we got the Panthers. Last year, they were 5-12, and they moved on from Matt Rule. And then they went out and drafted Bryce Young, number 1 overall, made that big swing, got rid of DJ Moore, part of that Bears trade. And they, looking on paper, they have a decent O-line, decent D-line. They have J.C. Horn in the secondary. Went out, they signed Adam Thielen, and went out and signed Hayden Hurst as well for tight end. So overall, and Miles Sanders as well, giving him a bag. Pretty much the only running back that did get paid this offseason, ironically enough. But what can you say there? And then they hired Frank Reich, who is now their offensive coordinator. They went out and got Deuce Staley from the Lions for the defensive coordinator. So this team on paper, to me, looks pretty average. I think they'll have some growing pains, but this is a team that I still think is trending upwards. You got rid of the Sam Darnolds of the world, the Baker Mayfields of the world. Now you have an actual planet quarterback and building a team around him. So at least for the moment, trending upward, but by no means will they be world beaters.
Yeah, for me, Frank Reich is kind of like the 2010 comedies. Like when Seth Rogen like was pumping out like Neighbors and all of those movies where you're like, I mean, that's fine. And like, I got a chuckle, but I really want to only go back to it once. And I feel, and it's kind of like a little bit boring, which I think is the thing with Frank Reich, where he was in Indianapolis. He was supposed to, he got the job because of Doug Peterson, basically, because he was the Super Bowl coordinator for the Eagles that year. Goes over, has Phillip Rivers, almost beats the Bills. So you're like, okay, there's something there. Maybe we don't get someone who's 80 years old to play quarterback for the Colts. Go out there, get Carson Wentz. You're trending towards the playoffs, and then you lose to the Urban Meyer Jaguars, where Urban Meyer wasn't there, but they're like, all right, well, we got nothing to lose, so let's go kick our division rivals out of the playoffs this year and out of that wild card spot. Breaks Pat McAfee's heart. Ends up getting fired after the disaster that was last year in Indianapolis, and really kind of just a vanilla head coach. And I don't think his style in Carolina is really going to take them to the next spot. It's a very safe coaching hire, but I think he's someone who really should have waited a year, had to be a coordinator again to prove himself that he can be a head coach in the NFL. So as far as rebuilding a team, I'm not in love with Frank Reich. Not in love with the weapons there for Bryce Young, even though I think he will have some moments where you're like, okay, good player there. But I think it's going to be a tough, long year for the Panthers. Got a lot of rebuilding to still do on that offense.
Agreed. And then Tampa Bay, what happened last year? Tom Brady, kind of a clunky year for them. And then he retires. A couple other players move on. And now they have Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask running the helm. Expected to be terrible. Expected to be in the Caleb Williams argument as well. Probably the last year we'll see Todd Bowles as a head coach. But overall, their sentiment there, probably tanking, honestly.
Yeah, definitely tanking. And I was pretty early on this where I was like, this might be the season where Mike Evans is like, I need to go. Yeah. And I was starting to talk about the offseason. I'm like, Mike Evans is one of 5 players in NFL history to have, believe it's like 10,000 receiving yards and 80 plus touchdowns. And he's one of 5 people. I believe it's Marvin Harrison, Calvin Johnson, Randy Moss, and he's a older player.
Jerry Rice, probably.
Jerry Rice, yeah. So he's one of 5 players. So when you talk about underrated and overlooked receivers in their generation, Mike Evans has the resume to go up to DeAndre Hopkins, go up to Antonio Brown, go up to Julio Jones and be like, I have the resume of a top 5 Hall of Famer, which all those receivers are. So Mike Evans is a player where had a good year with Tom Brady last year. It's not really showing any major concerns or signs of slowing down. So I think he's someone who needs to get traded. Gave the Tampa Bay Buccaneers until Wednesday before the NFL kicks off to give him a new contract, or he's going to ask for a trade, or it's going to be his last year in Tampa Bay. And then Baker Mayfield at quarterback. We all know what Baker Mayfield is going to be. We don't need to trash Baker Mayfield here again on the show until he actually plays horrible again. And then their head coach, Todd Bowles, is someone who has a losing record as a head coach without Tom Brady. So,
Yeah.
I mean, he's a great defensive coordinator, did a great job with that defense, but he's also at fault for losing that game versus the Rams because he let Cooper Kupp run wide one-on-one down the field, which gave the Rams the victory there. So just another year where the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are back to being the worst franchise in the NFL, along with the Commanders and the Cardinals this year. They're going to be dwelling at the bottom of the league and competing for, again, Caleb Williams.